At 5:12 a.m., the stillness of Yokota Air Base, tucked in the western suburbs of Tokyo, is abruptly broken by a sharp, high-pitched alert. A foreign aircraft has just breached the outer edge of Japan's air defense identification zone. It's fast, silent, and not responding to any communication attempts. Within seconds, the base is in full motion. U.S. Air Force F-35. Lightning II pilots, assigned to Quick Reaction Alert QRA duties, are already sprinting toward their jets. The hangar lights flash on, alarms wail, and within 90 seconds, two fully armed F-35s are streaking down the runway under full afterburner. This isn't an exercise. It's a live mission. The unidentified aircraft is flying at high altitude, lacks a transponder signal, and is heading toward sensitive airspace near Japan. That combination of silence and speed is an immediate cause for concern. Command doesn't wait. A scramble order is issued. And if you're curious what it feels like to launch into the unknown, with adrenaline surging and your heart hammering against your chest plate, buckle in. Because what comes next caught even seasoned air traffic controllers by surprise.
4 quick reaction alerts. Scramble, 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 acknowledge.
You're right.
What exactly does a U.S. pilot have to assess in those critical first 2 minutes of launch? The mission clock starts ticking the moment the alert sounds. The lead pilot, call sign Falcon 12, vaults into the cockpit as ground crews pull away safety blocks. The F-35's systems hum to life. There is no time for diagnostics. Everything is pre-programmed. The jet's single Pratt and Whitney F-135 engine unleashes a roar that echoes off the hangars. Within 4 minutes, Falcon 12 is airborne, followed seconds later by his wingman. This is a textbook QRA scramble, an immediate launch to intercept a potential threat intruding into monitored airspace. It's not just a show of force, it's a declaration. We see you, and we are prepared. The cause for this scramble? A radar contact with no transponder signal moving steadily at high altitude. It had crossed into Japan's ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zone, a zone where all foreign aircraft must report identification. The aircraft had ignored repeated radio requests from Japanese defense controllers. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command authorized the QRA launch. At Yokota, QRA crews are always ready. Pilots sleep in flight gear, within steps of their aircraft. Jets are armed and parked on alert pads. Ground teams are drilled to get a fighter airborne in under 5 minutes. Although Japan's own F-15Js typically respond first, U.S. F-35s based in Tokyo are fully integrated into the response grid. In many cases, they are the point of the spear. This time, 2 F-35s were launched, with a third standing by. Falcon 12 checks in with PACAF command and switches to encrypted tactical channels as his radar locks onto the target. Why would any aircraft be flying without a transponder so close to Allied airspace? Why risk no communication? Within 13 minutes of the initial alert, Falcon 12 and his wingman are cruising at 33,000 feet. Their radars identify the bogey, a large, slow-moving aircraft maintaining a steady heading at 31,000 feet. There's no formation, no IFF signal, no response to hails. The radar signature and speed profile match known characteristics of a Chinese surveillance platform, possibly a Shanxi KJ-2000 or a newer KJ-600. These aircraft frequently operate along the borders of national airspace to gather intelligence, test reaction times, and collect electromagnetic data. Falcon 12 radios, Tally 1, large high-wing aircraft, no escort. Confirmation is logged. As they approach to within 1,800 feet, the F-35s initiate a visual identification pass. The lead jet moves to the left side, below and forward, while the wingman maintains distance on the right flank. They're looking for visible features, tail markings, antennas, and radar domes. The unidentified aircraft flies on undisturbed. No turns, no speed changes, no acknowledgement. It acts as if the F-35s aren't even there. Now the next phase begins, the human signal. Falcon 12 dips his wing and makes standard NATO hand gestures from the cockpit, a universal language of warning. He signals the aircraft to divert and follow. There is no response. Though not yet inside Japan's sovereign airspace, the route it's flying skirts within visual range of U.S. naval operations near Okinawa. This is common with Chinese military aircraft. They remain just inside legal boundaries, but provoke nonetheless. These missions are not about violating airspace. They're about testing limits. Every second spent inside the ADIZ lets foreign surveillance systems gather radar data, communications frequencies, and response behavior from U.S. and Japanese forces. Falcon 12 tightens his position, rebroadcasting the warning over civil and military channels. Again, no reaction. Suddenly, the Chinese aircraft tilts slightly to the left. It's a subtle movement, but intentional. A test? A taunt? Hard to say. The wingman monitors closely and confirms the target remains steady. Back at command, a decision is made. Authorization is given for escort protocol. The F-35s reposition to flank the aircraft. The intention? To pressure the foreign jet away from the monitored zone without escalating. The Chinese aircraft remains passive. But then, just as the fighters prepare to peel off, it drops altitude rapidly, a full 3,000 feet in seconds. That sudden descent isn't normal for a surveillance aircraft in level flight. The F-35s reposition instantly, their electronic countermeasure systems lighting up with low-frequency pings. It's not a missile lock, but it's something. Falcon 12's cockpit instruments detect mild jamming or electronic probing. These could be tests, attempts to gather data on the F-35's radar signature, or efforts to provoke a response. Analysts monitoring from Yokota see it too. Then, another radar contact appears, 60 miles east. Smaller, faster. A drone? A decoy? The F-35s hold formation. Their engagement protocols prohibit splitting formation unless actively threatened. They track both contacts, relaying telemetry and radar imagery back to command. Military intelligence analysts suggest China uses dual-platform tactics. While one aircraft collects data, the second, often an unmanned drone, remains outside visual range to monitor Allied reactions. Eventually, the original aircraft, likely a KJ-2000, begins a gradual southeast turn. It's now heading away from Japan. The second contact vanishes from radar shortly after. Mission success. No weapons used, no breaches made. But this wasn't routine. This was a deliberate test. A probe. A signal. Back on the ground, analysts dissect every element. The ECM spikes, the response time, the radio silence. These scrambles are about far more than just physical presence. Let's talk aircraft. The F-35 Lightning II isn't just a fighter jet. It's a fifth-generation, stealth-enabled, multi-role combat platform. With radar-absorbing skin, an advanced AESA radar, and data fusion capabilities, it can track, engage, and outmaneuver threats without ever being seen. Its weapon systems include AIM-1 20DA MRAAMs, sidewinders, and a 25mm internal cannon. But, in intercept missions like this, its real strength is presence. It shows up fast, stays persistent, and dominates the sky without ever needing to fire. China's KJ series aircraft, by contrast, serve a very different role. They collect, they analyze, they record. To the public, this looks like shadow boxing, but to those watching closely, these events signal strategic posturing. Why does it keep happening? Because the Pacific isn't just geography anymore. It's a battlefield of signals, satellites, and strategic zones. China seeks control over waters near Taiwan, the South China Sea, and Japanese maritime zones. The U.S., through treaties with Japan, South Korea, and Australia, remains committed to deterrence and stability. In 2023 alone, Japan's self-defense forces logged more than 1,100 intercepts, many involving Chinese aircraft. Some were bombers, others spy planes. Nearly all came close to the ADIZ. From Beijing's perspective, these flights are legal and defensive. From Washington's point of view, they're probing missions aimed at seeing how far they can push without pushing too far. And so, the intercepts continue. For Falcon 12 and his wingman, the mission ends with a smooth landing and a quiet debrief. No shots fired, no airspace violated. But the implications are anything but routine. Because every scramble, every intercept, and every moment of silence between two aircraft flying at 30,000 feet is part of a larger equation. And if you think this is just routine military theater, ask yourself this. What message was that Chinese crew trying to send? And what message did the U.S. send back? One thing is certain. Neither side missed it. And somewhere, deep in hardened command bunkers, both countries are logging every maneuver, every radar spike, and every second of response time, preparing for the next encounter. Because one day, it may not just be a test. Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want to support more true defense stories like this, subscribe and join our growing community. Until next time, stay sharp, stay informed, and remember, in the skies over the Pacific, nothing is ever routine. The events of that early morning intercept over the Pacific didn't just end with the return to Yokota. In fact, it sparked a wave of operational reviews, intelligence debriefs, and diplomatic monitoring that lasted for days. While the two F-35 pilots were back on the ground, grabbing water and heading into their secure debriefing room, satellite uplinks, radar feeds, and acoustic analysis data were already being reviewed by analysts thousands of miles away. One of the biggest takeaways wasn't just the speed of the Chinese aircraft or its refusal to respond. It was the signature it emitted, or rather, the anomalies around it. The passive radar data picked up by the F-35s indicated possible electromagnetic scanning. This is the kind of signal-gathering activity typically associated with airborne early warning, or ELINT, electronic intelligence missions. In other words, they weren't just flying close to Japanese airspace. They were soaking up data the entire time. This kind of behavior raises serious flags within the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Every time a foreign aircraft performs these maneuvers, it helps build a map of how Allied forces react, which radio frequencies go active, what radar systems engage, and how fast response units scramble. In military terms, these aren't passive flights. They're data mining operations. That's why, later that same day, a secure call was initiated between Yokota Air Base and the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, JASDF, headquarters in Ichigaya. Also on the line were naval analysts from the U.S. 7th Fleet. The consensus? This wasn't a one-off. And it wasn't. 48 hours later, just past 2 a.m., another alert sounded, this time at Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. A different F-35 squadron was stationed on rotational deployment. The target this time, a high-speed, medium-altitude object streaking across the Philippine Sea with no identification, no transponder, and a nearly perfect straight-line trajectory aimed toward U.S. naval lanes. Once again, the F-35s were scrambled. The pilots, call signs Blade 61 and Blade 62, lifted off within minutes. By 2:21 a.m., both jets were in the air. The object was flying at 25,000 feet. Visual contact was made by 2:29 a.m. But this time, it wasn't a manned aircraft. It was a drone. A sleek delta-wing configuration, most likely a variant of China's WZ-8 high-speed reconnaissance drone. These platforms are designed to travel long distances at high altitude and high speed, gathering imagery and electronic data without risking a pilot. And unlike traditional drones, these aren't slow, vulnerable craft. The WZ-8, or a variant of it, can reach near hypersonic speeds and still evade most radar locks. Blade 61's radar tried to maintain a lock, but the drone's erratic movement and low-profile configuration made it difficult. There was no communication, no deviation in flight path. It was on a mission, and it didn't care who knew. This time, the F-35s weren't instructed to engage or escort. Instead, they shadowed. They observed. They recorded. By 2:47 a.m., the drone banked sharply and headed west, away from the monitoring zone. Blades 61 and 62 returned to base, and another event was logged. So, what are these encounters really about? Power dynamics, message sending, and battles without bullets. Each intercept is like a piece of a puzzle. When combined with satellite data, undersea acoustic readings, and cyber intel, a picture emerges of what a nation is trying to do. And right now, China is making one thing clear. It wants to see how tightly the U.S. and its allies guard their skies. Every intercept is a message. And the F-35, with all its stealth, speed, and sensors, is the perfect messenger. As tensions rise across the Indo-Pacific, expect more intercepts, more shadow boxing, and more moments when the thin line between surveillance and confrontation starts to blur.